I think we are ready to go. And I would like to call today's meeting of the Paid Family Medical Leave Insurance Authority to order. Amber, could you please take attendance?
Hello, morning everyone. I'm Locke. I'm going to be taking the attendance in place of Amber today. So I'll start. Amber's not feeling well. So to start, Josh Cabal.
Present.
Fran Pastori.
Present.
John Scott.
Here.
Adrian Cochran.
Here.
Daryl Dzuzinski. Sal Luciano. I believe is not here. Alex Marcelino. Sorry. Paul Patiamos.
Here.
Mike is not joining us today. I did see Molly Weston Williamson.
Present.
Isha Canada.
Present.
Justin Zartman is not here. And Eva Zimmerman.
Present.
Yes. And I believe we have a quorum.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I would like to, before we dive into the agenda, acknowledge some dignitaries we have with us on the call. Senator Kushner, Chair of the Labor Committee, I see on. Representative Aurora, I see on. And I am feverishly scrolling through Zoom. Erin, am I missing anyone here?
Representative Porter is also with us today.
Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Porter, our other labor co-chair, is with us as well. Wonderful. So thank you for joining us, as you so often do. Okay, so we will move to review and approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
This is Paul, so moved.
Second, John Scott.
Second, Daryl.
Great. Any all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Minutes are approved. Thank you. We'll go to agenda item number 3. And I will turn this over to Michael.
Good morning, everybody. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I've been having some difficulty with my headset, so I want to make sure of that. Good morning, everybody. I'm here to talk about some of the questions and comments that we received as part of our, what we're calling the consolidated policy documents. It's basically a list of all our policies that we're attempting to make official based on decisions we've made over the past year, particularly in the ways in which the paid leave program interacts with the public. So, you know, rules around contributions, rules around how someone would submit a benefit, a claim for benefits, rules around penalties and things of that nature. I'm going to try and share my screen right now. Can folks see an Excel spreadsheet?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So as I mentioned, it was a fairly broad spectrum of policies that we had written and posted. And as you may expect, we did receive a large number of comments. I do want to take a second to thank the public for the comments. They were incredibly helpful. The perspective of the larger audience, the extra set of eyes, I think they've really made these policies stronger. So I do want to thank the public as well as the board for their comments. As I mentioned, we did receive a large number of comments. It's almost 100 of them. We probably don't have time to go through all of them in this meeting. We'd probably be here till the new year. So what we decided to do is kind of find some to highlight that we can talk through at this meeting. So if Amber had sent out across this spreadsheet to the board a couple days ago, there are 2 tabs on it. The second tab is all the comments and questions received, along with our proposed responses for it. And then the first tab is the items that we wanted to highlight and kind of walk through for this meeting. If there's anything that we want to pull from the second tab and bring into this meeting, we certainly can. We felt like this was a good representation of the comments. There's some of the more I don't know, controversial is not the right word for it, but the more impactful items, the more commented on items, we felt these are the ones that were most important to highlight in this discussion. The first note, actually, let me just talk through what the spreadsheet looks like. We organize it by topic, by the location of the, where it falls in the policy document, the actual question, request, or comment we received, the authority's response to that comment, and then whether we took action, made changes based on it, and if those changes were substantive or technical. Just want to highlight, we have kind of late breaking news in the last 48 hours. 2 of the topics that we were going to talk about, we're actually going to put a pause on at this time. We received some feedback, primarily from like private plan carriers, that maybe wanted to re-examine these topics. And the feedback was, well taken. It was good feedback, and we felt it's more important that we get these topics particularly correct rather than trying to push them through with everything else. So we're just going to put a hold on a couple of the items, and fortunately, there happen to be items that we don't necessarily need a solution for prior to January 1st. So I'll just kind of highlight those for a second. The first one is about minimum fair wage. As folks know, our benefit is based on what the minimum wage is in Connecticut at the time. And then as people know, we have 2 scheduled increases, at least in the next couple of years, for the minimum fair wage. So people whose paid leave request is prior to the minimum wage changing would receive one benefit calculation, and then people whose paid leave request is after the minimum wage would potentially receive a different, a higher benefit calculation. So the question was, what do we do with those claims that start before the change and then bleed over into the post change? We initially thought it was appropriate to kind of recalculate all of those leaves that are kind of mid-flight, but we did receive feedback that might not be the best solution. I can talk about the pros and cons, but essentially some of the reasoning behind why we were putting a pause on this is it's different than how any other state handles it. If you look at like Massachusetts, Washington, New York, they all look at the minimum wage, or actually the standard average weekly wage for that, the state average weekly wage for those states, as of the time of the first date of leave. So that also kind of mirrors what happens in similar programs like disability policies, which really look at what is the circumstance at the first date of leave. So we did receive requests whether we really wanted to differ from that standard. So there's a lot of changes that need to happen, a lot of systems that need to be updated if we were to move ahead with that. And therefore, we're going to take a moment to kind of re-examine it, talk it through, and decide if we really want to make that change when the minimum wage changes. I know I just spoke a lot. Does that make sense? Or any questions about this decision to delay this policy?
Makes sense.
Thank you, Fran.
I see, just to confirm, it sounds like the updated recommendation is let's take a pause and reconsider the rate approach, not any particular determination of the rate approach. Is that accurate?
Exactly. So we may end up keeping this approach, or we may completely reverse it. And even though the first minimum wage change isn't happening until July, there are systems that need to be updated. That obviously can't happen overnight for both us and the authority, the public plan through AFLAC, and the private plan. So we do want a decision sooner rather than later, but we just want to make sure we're thoughtful about that and truly work through all the options and come to the right decision. And the second topic we're putting a pause on is similar in relation to the date of the first leave versus what happens over the course of that leave. It relates to private plans and what happens when a private plan either transitions from the public plan to a private plan or from a private plan to the public plan, and what do you do with all of those leaves that are sort of in flight at the moment of that transition? For kind of historical purposes for allocating past leave usage, we thought the appropriate response was to kind of terminate those claims at the moment that the plan terminates and reopen them with the new carrier or the public plan. But we did receive feedback, and similar to the minimum wage, it's sort of contrary to standard practices, and we want to make sure that we're truly thinking about that correctly. And should the original carrier who had it on the first date of leave own it through the duration of the claim, even if the underlying plan terminates? So similar idea, we want to just pause and think this through, talk it through with particularly private plan carriers and come to the right outcome. This one doesn't have an official, date that it's due by. However, we do have private plans. Obviously, any private plans that are approved now are fine because there's no leaves that are happening under them. But starting April 1st, we do have some private plans that are going to go in effect. So we need an answer by then. And if for some reason a private plan terminates prior to April 1st, we need to have an answer for what do we do with those leaves as well. So sooner rather than later, I'm sure we're going to want an answer, but it's another one that maybe we can pause for at least a second. Okay, on to the items that we think we have answers for. So the next category is talking about shutdowns and what happens during a shutdown and folks who might be receiving paid leave benefits. Initially, we had talked about furloughs versus temporary layoffs versus permanent layoffs and what happens in those scenarios. We didn't think that was the right approach. And so we kind of removed that framework. And instead, we just talked about the scenario of a temporary shutdown where it's a planned shutdown. We're thinking, if an employer shuts down every year between Christmas and New Year's, what do we do for that week? Can an employee be on paid leave for that week when they're not scheduled to work? We went with, for that scenario, they wouldn't be eligible for paid leave benefits because it's not a scheduled work week or work day if it's a one-day shutdown. The reason we chose that primarily was it follows the FMLA guidance for the unpaid job protection component. Those days don't count towards their leave when it's that type of shutdown. We felt that it made sense to at least mirror that. It's somewhat controversial, so I do want to take a moment to see if there's any questions about it. The next topic is, and obviously I'm going through these too fast. Please stop me if you want to talk about anything more. Please don't hesitate to interrupt me. I'm fine with that. The next topic is about the leave allowance. Essentially, how do we calculate the 12-month period that you have 12 weeks of paid leave usage in? As folks may know, there's the 4 options available in the FMLA statute. And then there's a couple of specific items in the statute for military caregiver and for victims of family violence. So from a public program, the paid leave program is going to use the 12-month look back for all types of leave. So that we're not going to mirror the employer's version or mix and match or anything like that. We're going to always do the 12-month look back formula. However, employers for their job protection are eligible to choose, or allowed to choose a different option if they want. And then private plans, if they're looking to mirror those, can certainly match that. And because military caregiver statute talks about 12-month look ahead period, and because the family violence statute talks about the calendar year basis, they could use those even if they don't match the remaining leaves. So we wrote a policy that indicated what we're going to use and then what our options are available for the private plans. Does that make sense?
I had a question about that, particularly the difference between the public and private plans. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean if a worker is covered by the public plan and then moves to the private plan, or vice versa? Because now they're going to end up with potentially inconsistent look back periods. Like, how is that going to be interpreted to ensure they get their full benefits?
Yeah, it's a good question and probably part of a broader question. So this isn't part of our list, but we did talk about what happens when an employee changes jobs and moves from a private plan to the public plan. And that earlier conversation about when the whole plan terminates versus when an individual employee, we felt, at least from the private plan to the public plan, it's okay that they kind of can get a fresh 12 weeks. We couldn't think of another way we can't track every single employee that had a private plan and then moved. So for individuals, we were kind of okay with a fresh 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. It seems like that could also happen here, where it's, the change in formula could result in additional time.
Got it. So it's going to be interpreted as sort of like you get a reset.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then, I think I mentioned earlier, there was a question whether we could try and mirror whatever the employer's, allocation using, follow that formula. We couldn't figure out a way to do that, particularly in the case of multiple employers. Employee works for multiple employers. How do we allocate their paid leave time that matches both of those employers if they use different utilization periods. And similar if someone changes jobs. So we just went with the 12-month look back. That seemed to be the most appropriate. And it's probably the best option to avoid stacking where someone gets essentially 24 weeks because they just time their 2 years appropriately. The next couple were specific to family violence leave. We wrote the policy to make it clear that even though the statute talks about calendar year when it comes to family violence leave, for the paid leave component, we're still looking at the 12-month look back. And then specific, once again, to family violence, the request was whether the 12-day cap for family violence leave applies, or whether they can get the full 12 weeks or something in between for family violence. And the hope was that, from the comment, was that potentially they could use more than 12 days for the paid leave, but job protection would only last 12 days for family violence. The authority, we understood the reading of that statute. However, it felt like the purpose of the paid leave program is essentially to provide paid leave benefits for times that previously had been unpaid, but only job protection. So we felt it made sense to use the 12-day limitation for that particular leave. It also mirrors the policy the board adopted earlier in the glossary of terms. So it's just kind of keeping with that and kind of recodifying that position. Any questions about that? Okay. Next, hopefully really quick, we got a question about what a regular schedule was, and particularly what that means for paid leave utilization for intermittent and reduced, where an employee uses only part of the week. How do we figure out what that part of a week means? We updated the policy essentially to reflect, we do a 12-week look back from the time of the leave. What was their schedule during that 12 weeks? That establishes the standard. And then, if they take a partial week, it's based on whatever that 12-week standard schedule is. If the employee worked fewer than 12 weeks because they just happen to start working, but otherwise still qualify as a covered employee, we would use that shorter period of time. We wouldn't count the days that they weren't employed, but it's still 12 weeks whenever appropriate. A lot of questions on other income that they might be receiving from their employer, from a third party, whether they could receive them at the same time, who is the primary payer, whether they could receive all of one and then apply for paid leave benefits after and kind of stack the benefits. So we updated the policy to essentially answer a lot of those questions and more specifically spell out the primary versus secondary payer. I think at the end of the day, employees have a lot of option on what they're choosing to do. And as long as they're not receiving over 100% of benefits of what their normal schedule is or normal pay is, they can combine the benefits and either hours would be reduced or potentially the employer's benefits would be reduced based on who's primary. And then in a related topic, specific to workers' compensation, the statute says that you cannot receive paid leave benefits concurrently with workers' compensation. And there was a question about what about the non-wage replacement parts of workers' compensation? So like the medical bills component. If you're not receiving wage replacement, but you are getting medical bills paid for, you have funeral expenses paid for under workers' comp, does that also ban you from receiving paid leave benefits? I think the request was that it would not kind of exclude you from receiving both at the same time, but I think we felt the reading of the statute doesn't allow that. It really just talks about any benefits under those, it talks about the citations of the statutes, but any benefits under workers' compensation. So at least as how we're reading the statute now, we felt the plain reading said you couldn't receive, any benefits under workers' compensation concurrently with paid leave. Another hot topic was pregnancy. We received some requests about what that extra 2 weeks you get during pregnancy and what they meant, whether everyone would automatically get it, the 2 weeks every pregnant mother would automatically get it, when it applied. Obviously circumstances, the person still needs a serious health condition, they still need to actually take the time off in order to get that 2 weeks. And so, for things like, you may be planning on doing 2 weeks of bed rest and using that time because your doctor says that's appropriate for you. But the 2 weeks may not line up with your actual delivery date versus the due date. So you may plan on using 2 weeks, but you actually give birth early, so you only used 1 week. And in which case, that extra week would potentially be lost, because you cannot use it after the birth actually happens. It has to be during the pregnancy, not the postpartum period. And then a related topic about, does the serious health condition have to be due to the pregnancy, related to the pregnancy, connected to the pregnancy, or could it be an unrelated serious health condition that actually just happens to happen during the pregnancy, and whether that qualifies for the extra 2 weeks? I felt the reading of the statute is all that needs to happen is that the serious health condition occurs during the pregnancy. There's no sense that they have to be connected to each other. A lot of the feedback felt that that was the wrong impression and against the intent of the statute, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. For one, it's used that language during the pregnancy multiple times. It's not just one reference, it's several references to it. So, it clearly matches the intent. Also, it sort of makes sense to not have to have a conversation or discussion or decision about whether something's connected to the pregnancy or not. It's an easy black and white answer. Do I have a serious health condition? Am I pregnant? Am I on leave? If yes, the 2 weeks apply. If no, then they don't apply, rather than having an employer decide, is this connected? Having us decide, having a private plan decide, and coming up with potentially different outcomes based on what someone thinks is related to the pregnancy. Somewhat hot topics. I want to take a moment, pause if there's any questions about that.
I did have just a question here. My understanding is that the intent generally, in terms of understanding both the definition of serious health condition and the definition of incapacity here, is to try to be consistent with interpretations under the federal FMLA where possible. Is that right? That the goal is to try to make them line up?
I see Aaron nodding, so I'm gonna.
Yes, that was. So when we defined this last year, we were focusing on what does incapacitation mean? And so at the time in our glossary that the board adopted, we followed the federal regulations, which said incapacitation or incapacity includes both the time that you're not able to do your work, but also the treatment for the condition. So, and that's how Connecticut DOL is interpreting it as well. So this does include things like going to prenatal visits. You don't have to have complications. The question right now is this whole during versus due to, because last year we were so worried about prenatal visits, we didn't think about, oh, but what if you break your leg? But during means during. It doesn't say due to. And so that's why we wanted to highlight it here.
Got it. Thank you. I think that all makes sense. And I think, thank you for reminding me that there's a lot of additional useful context already provided in the glossary that fleshes out a lot of this.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Molly. Next several items. This is another example of how these comments are super helpful for us in making sure we have the correct policies in place. We talked about rounding and rounding of leave usage if you don't use like a full hour. From the public plan perspective, our administrator AFLAC is going to round to the minute. So if you use 7 minutes of leave, you get paid for the 7 minutes leave. Your 12 weeks reduced by the 7 minutes. We talked about private plans and what they could do. Initially, we wrote that they could round no greater than 15 minutes. But as was pointed out to us, FMLA allows employers to round potentially up to an hour. So if the private plans are mirroring the employers and they're rounding up to an hour, then that's acceptable for us, for the private plans. Obviously, similar scenario, if they're rounding to an hour, they have to pay for an hour. So if they're reducing their allocation by an hour, they get paid for the full hour, even if they only used 20 minutes of that. So just clarifying the policy around that. The next topic, there's a couple of topics about the timing of filing the claim and the rules around that. Initially, we had a policy that said if a leave is foreseeable and your paid leave request is foreseeable, you should notify us at least 30 days in advance, assuming you have that, you're aware of it more than 30 days in advance. We did receive feedback about how that was, so the reason we did that was it matched the FMLA rule about 30 days notice for foreseeability. We just received some pushback that the reason for that leave is, or the reason for that notice is different for employers versus us. Employers need to, find temporary workers, adjust schedules, reallocate, assignments. So 30 days is important to them in a way that it isn't necessarily important to the paid leave program because we don't have those burdens. And that was a fair point. So we did update our language to only say, so if we were going to do, we do request 30 days notice, and only if the failure to provide that notice in some way negatively impacts and harms our ability to adjudicate the claim, then perhaps we can delay or deny the approval. Essentially, the paperwork isn't there anymore, the person isn't there anymore, there's something going on that makes it difficult for us to adjudicate the claim appropriately, and if that failure is due to a lack of notice, perhaps in that scenario, we could delay the claim. I mean, ultimately, I think there is benefits to all parties to submit the notice or submit the claim as soon as possible. The employee's already potentially filling out the paperwork, handing it to their employer. Why then hand it to us 30 days later? The employer's already approving the claim, potentially 30 days in advance. They may then later get the employment notification or employment verification form from us. If that was given at the same time, that would obviously be easier for them. And then obviously for the authority, the earlier we get the notice, the earlier we can start the process, the less the gap potentially would apply between when the leave happens and when payment's made. And then also just, the more awareness we have of potential future leaves, the better awareness we have about our solvency. Do we have funds to cover it? Everything else. So we hope that was a good, kind of resolution to that. There still is a request for that notice, but not an automatic delay or denial of benefits based on it.
I think it's an excellent revision with that additional language. And I would just ask, I think it doesn't have to be in this document, but I think it would probably be really helpful to have somewhere, maybe it's in a less formal process, additional guidance on in what circumstances the authority will exercise that discretion. And I would really urge that to be a truly extraordinary remedy and only truly extreme circumstances where it's really not possible. But I think the clarification in the post language is great. And I think having additional language, which perhaps doesn't have to go through this formal process to really clarify when and how the authority will use that discretion, I think would also be really helpful to complement that change.
Absolutely, we could do that. Thank you, Molly. And the next topic is similar. This is about late notice, but more than 45 days after the leave begins. So we have a general rule for late filing. We're requesting the claim be filed within 45 days of the beginning of the leave, unless you have good cause for the delay. We initially wrote a rule that said for caregiver leave in particular, if the person were to pass away and then you file the claim, that makes it difficult for us to potentially pay the claim, to figure out what's going on, to make sure it actually is an appropriate leave usage. So that person's death could so late filing in the case of a person passing away kind of shortened that period of time someone had, and they had to kind of begin the process prior to the death. That was our initial rule. We did receive feedback that maybe was a little too harsh, and why don't we just follow the same standard as we do for every other leave, that same 45-day period. We thought that made sense, was appropriate. So essentially, we no longer have a separate call out for caregiver leave where the person being cared for passes away. Next topic, this is an important one, even though it's only a short item here. There were a lot of questions about wages, what wages count and what wages don't count towards benefits. And a couple examples. If an employee works in Connecticut and is a covered employee, has enough wages to qualify under the program, but they also have employment outside of the state with a separate employer, do those wages count? That's one example. And then a second example is if someone is working for an excluded employer, for example, they're a teacher working for a board of ed, which is one of the excluded categories. They don't qualify under that program, but they have wages in Connecticut under it. And then they have separate employment. Teachers the easiest example, because maybe during the summers they work in retail, and maybe over winter break they work in retail, and those earnings are enough to qualify for the program. Can they then sort of bring their teaching income into the back door? So there was a question whether those subject earnings would apply to both of those when it comes to benefit calculations. And I think the statute isn't entirely clear on that. When it defines subject earnings, it refers to, I think, the UI statutes, and it's really talking about the types of income. It doesn't have to be monetary. It doesn't really talk about the sources of the income. So we felt like that still felt like a gray area for us, and we're going to interpret it, at least we wrote the policy to interpret it, that subject earnings only means earnings that you received from an employer who's participating in the program. And I'll kind of give the reason for why we chose that. if we went the other way, if we said that subject earnings, potentially includes employer pay that's not subject to the program, that would require, because subject earnings is used both for benefit calculation and for contributions. That same definition is used for both. It would require non-participating employers to potentially withhold and submit to us 0.5% of employees' paychecks because they happen to have a second job. So every school system, every municipality who doesn't participate in the program would now have to ask every employee, do you have other income? Do you have another employer that qualifies for the program? I now have to withhold your paycheck, your money from your paycheck. So because and that seems like it's an administrative burden, not the intent of the program, that these employers shouldn't have to participate if they're not required to, including the contribution component of it. It felt like the appropriate decision is to go the opposite way and say, well, because they don't count for contributions, they also shouldn't count for benefit purposes, which also seems to mirror, what this program is all about. It's about, you're part of the program, you're contributing to the program, and therefore you're able to receive benefits from it. It's sort of a pretty big topic because it's about who qualifies and what benefits are paid. So I'm going to pause again and see if there's any questions or concerns about that.
I have several questions.
Okay.
So first, just on clarification of terminology. So except for the specific language in 2 about private plans, when in the definition of subject earnings, it says an employer that participates in the Connecticut Paid Leave Program, I'm assuming that's intended to mean whether that participation is through a private or public plan, other than where specific. Okay.
Absolutely. So where that's going to come into play is mostly where someone moves from a private plan to a public and their past earnings were under a private plan, that would count. But if they happen to be under both, we would ignore the private earnings because the private plan is kind of covering that part. They're kind of going to file 2 claims, one potentially with us for their public employment, and then one potentially with the private employer for their private employment.
So essentially, if you have, I think maybe be able to run a couple scenarios. If there's an employee who has 2 jobs, one of which uses a private plan, one of which does not, they're just going to file 2 different claims, and the system will figure out how to allocate their income appropriately so they get their full benefits between the 2.
Yes, we'll sort of isolate the private plan and ignore the earnings, ignore the leave, because they may only take partial leave from one and the other. We're only going to really look at their public employment for that scenario.
Got it. But in a scenario where a worker, I think this is addressed in the language, I just want to make sure I'm reading it right. It looks like if a worker is covered by a private plan, leaves that employment, at that point, that worker's former private plan earnings are now being counted for public plan eligibility and benefits.
Yes, I mean, there's the 12-week period where they might still be covered under the private plan, but so in which case we would ignore, they wouldn't be able to file a public claim for that. They're still kind of covered under the private plan, but yes, in general, yes.
So one way or another, they're eligible for benefits that are based on their private plan earning. It's just a question of like from whom based on their timing. Got it. That's extremely helpful to clarify. And then I guess my other question, and I think this is actually not in the definition of subject earnings, I think it comes up with multiple jobs. In a scenario where a worker was previously covered by the public plan, had earnings there, and is now has only one job, and that job is with a private plan employer. Under those circumstances, does the private plan calculate their benefits and eligibility based on their old public plan earnings, or does that worker have to go and file a separate claim based on their old earnings?
So they're currently working for a private plan. They used to work for a public plan, and so we're allowing the private plan, if they want to factor in earnings from other employers, or only factor in earnings from that private plan. So once they're covered, assuming they're not in that 12-week window where they're kind of post-employment with the public employer, it's possible that the public earnings they had no longer factor into their private plan.
Got it. Request. So in that circumstance, if they would be eligible for additional benefits, like pretend that their prior income was much higher, in those circumstances, would their remedy be they go to the public plan for the additional benefits?
Not if they're outside the period.
So their income just disappears.
Essentially, which is something that we adopted. This isn't actually new. This is something that the board adopted in the first private plan policy document from a year ago. And then this past November, we actually allowed private plan employers to consider previous earnings. Previously, we said they didn't have to do it at all. Now they can, but the reality is there's no mechanism for a private plan employer to validate outside earnings because we can't provide that to them. They can't get it from DOL. So it's not feasible. So it's just something an employee will have to take into consideration before they take a job with a private plan employer.
So I hear you on the reasons that it would be extremely challenging for private plans to account for that additional income. I think my question is then, if the private plan can't account for this covered income that the worker paid contributions on, it seems like the solution to that should be that the public plan covers the difference.
If they no longer work for a covered employer, that's the very first question that gets asked is, are you working for a covered employer? And then the second part B of that is, are you working for a private plan employer? If the answer is yes, I work for a private plan employer, the authority is going to say, then you need to go to your private plan. Like, we don't have the ability to track the individual. It really starts with where do you work? Do you work for a covered employer? If so, are you with the public plan or the private plan? There's no, I'm not sure how to say this, but it's really no different than a person who's been working in Connecticut and then moves to another state, or a person who's been working for a private sector employer and then takes a job with a municipality. It just doesn't go with you.
I think this, I mean, I recognize that we've got to get this document moving, but I think that's a circumstance in which a worker who is still covered by the Connecticut paid leave law essentially forfeits benefits to which they are entitled and benefits for which they have paid because they move into private plan employment, I think is a substantial restriction on the statute's definition of total earnings. I think that is a real loss. And I hear you on the need to allocate responsibility between private and public plans, which I think some of the prior documentation did. But I think if it's going to be essentially your prior income disappears until and unless you leave that employment, I think that is something that at a minimum will need to be really substantially well messaged, including that it should be, I think, much more explicitly the fact that it's specifically not just you won't get paid through this private plan, but you will not get paid at all. You will forfeit benefits to which you're entitled. I think that needs to be a part of the voting process.
You're right that we can work on getting that messaged. I don't think it's accurate to say that you're forfeiting benefits to which you're entitled, but I also think that what you're reacting to is actually things that the board adopted in 2 previous policy documents, is not actually part of this policy document. So
I hear that. I think my understanding of the prior documents had been that they were specifying the responsibility of the private plans, and that what the commensurate responsibilities of the public plan would be. My recollection had been that wasn't spelled out as clearly, but I apologize if I'm just misremembering on what the public plan piece of this would be.
And oddly enough, I think the next item might even be related to this about the waiting periods, because it's a similar circumstance where we added a 3-month waiting period for brand new employers who are enrolling for the first time in the program, as well as a 3-month waiting period for self-employed or sole proprietors who are enrolling in the program. These would begin January 1st or later, so any sole proprietors who enrolled now would not have this period. And a similar situation can happen where an employee was under covered plan, they decide to work for a startup that's brand new. We're requiring a 3-month period of time between registration with us and when they're actually eligible to receive benefits from us. So it's possible that they may lose coverage briefly. In that scenario, it just happens that they're likely to be within that 12-week post-employment under their previous employer, so they're still potentially a covered employer there. But if they left the job months earlier and then joined the startup, it's possible there's some loss of coverage. But we felt like this was appropriate. The idea, you to contribute for some period of time before you're eligible. This is sort of like this 2021 year has been a window where people are contributing but not receiving benefits. The 3-month is sort of a rolling period for new employers who are participating in a plan, a sort of mini contribution period. And it's also, we felt, important to kind of risk mitigation principles of particularly for the sole proprietors or self-employed, if they know they're about to have a leave, they're not participating in the program, but they know they have a surgery plan, they know they're about to have a baby, and they're going to planning on taking leave for that. We don't want them to enroll the day before that event happens, never contribute to the program, and then collect benefits. And then the greatest concern is, and then if they shut down that sole proprietorship or self-employment after the leave is over, we're stuck having paid benefits to someone who has never contributed potentially to the program. So we felt the 3-month period of time where they're at least contributing gave us something, and they're a part of the plan, they're part of the program. And there's also a delay between when they decide to participate and when a potential paid leave event happens. Do you want to pause there for if there's any questions, concerns about that? If none, then last one on my list is with respect to willful misrepresentations and penalties. We had 2 sections that were commented on that were the comments were felt that they were a little harsh. One was we had a section saying that willful misrepresentation included things the employee or person knows to not be true or should know to not be true. And the request about they should know to not be true is potentially overly punitive because their lack of knowledge may not be intentional or misleading. It's just they weren't aware, and why compare them to the standard average person versus what they actually know to be true. So we agreed with that comment. We did remove the reference to should know not to be true. That's not part of willful misrepresentation. It's actually things you actually know to not be true. And then the second part of that is with respect to failure to tell us something that would be impactful to the paid leave claim. We essentially initially said any failure to tell us a material factor is potentially a willful misrepresentation and subject to a penalty. And instead, we're using the standard that if we asked you about something and you fail to tell us, that's the willful misrepresentation, not just a failure to tell us in general. So it's sort of, it's truly a lie of omission because we asked you about it and you were quiet or said not applicable in the form or whatever the outcome is. And that's truly misrepresentation versus, you just didn't know you had to tell us something. That was the last item I have. I'll be happy to talk about any of the other comments or any of the other, policies. If people are still awake, I feel like I've talked for a while. And I think if there are no comments or questions, I think we do want to have a vote if possible.
I just had a clarifying question about the last point about willful misrepresentation. I think that the revisions to the definition are excellent and extremely responsive. I had a question about the relationship between those revisions and the language about failure to report income in 15 days in CTPL 06 payment C, which it looks like, and I apologize if I'm misreading because it moved around and it makes it harder to track the track changes. It looks like it still says that failure to report income within 15 days will be considered willful misrepresentation. Is the intent that that's modified by the definition, so it's only willful if the authority has specifically requested it, or is it still automatic whether the authority requested or not?
Let me just pull that up.
So we are telling the applicant that they have to provide that. So it will be requested if the board just trying to bookend that particular issue by having it in both places. Because if people end up just sort of looking at the policy documents specifically for like, what do I have to tell you about wages? We wanted to make sure it was there.
Got it.
And
So
it's really clear about that one. So it's extra clear as opposed to the opposite. I don't know what the opposite is. We're trying to be extra clear here.
Got it. So the overpayment language reinforces the language that's already in the definition, but it all still goes together and follows the same rules. Got it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and sorry for all the redlining. There were a number of changes, so it does become a little bit unreadable, and I apologize for that.
Sorry, this is Britt Marie. I just have a quick question on that point about the overpayment. Does it matter whether the authority is the primary or secondary payer in terms of the reporting back on that point from an employee?
Yeah, I mean, particularly for that scenario, if our benefits are not going to be changed based on it, then that's obviously it's not an overpayment, because if we're the primary payer that is secondary, then failure to report us wouldn't result in an overpayment. And obviously we'd rather be told about it than not be told. Don't assume that it's not going to factor in, because the actual plan itself with the source of that payment may be the primary. So over providing the information is obviously good for us, but if it doesn't result in a change in our calculation, it wouldn't be an overpayment.
All right, do we have any final questions or comments before we move to vote on this document? Okay, hearing none, can I have a motion to adopt the amended consolidated policy documents for implementation by the authority?
So
Motion
move.
from Daryl.
Second?
I'm
Daryl, I
the
think.
first.
Okay, John on the first, Daryl on the second. Any opposed?
Okay.
Or sorry, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. And thanks to the team who worked on this. It gives everyone a pretty up close and personal sense of the technical complexity associated with administering a program like this. And we really appreciate the time and effort that everyone has put into and the comments that we received. Okay, we'll move to item number 4 on the agenda, which is a vote to adopt the revised employee handbook. And for discussion on this, I'll turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Josh. So we had shared with you the revised employee handbook 2 months ago before we posted it for public comment. We received no comments from the public about the revised handbook. Just as a reminder, the board adopted the original handbook, I think back in April of 2020 when we had 1 employee, and we now have 25, and half of us are going to be considered classified state employees come January. So it became crucial to make some amendments to the handbook to make sure that our policies were consistent with the policies of the state with regard to classified public employees. And also just to recognize that now that we actually have staff, it's appropriate to direct inquiries to the staff members and not to you as our board members. So we would greatly appreciate you adopting the revised handbook so that we can kind of move forward with those new policies rather than the ones that really don't fit our new organization.
Thank you, Erin. Any questions for Erin or comments? Okay, hearing none, can I have a motion to adopt the revised employee handbook for implementation by the authority?
Paul.
I heard Paul. Can I have a second?
Second.
I think that was John.
Yeah, Les.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. All right, we'll go to agenda item number 5, which is an update on claims administration. Andrea.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. I have a couple of slides that Jessica Vargas put together for me, so thank you, Jessica. So as from last Wednesday, we have 1,909 claims as of last evening. I think it's actually gone up a little bit. I was just on the site. And you can see here that the majority of the claims are for continuous leave and just a few for intermittent, and the rest are for other. And if you look on the right side of the slide, you can see that we have a significant number of claims for pregnancy and childbirth and for own illness and bonding. So we've had a lot of families that have been planning, either they've already had their children and they've applied for bonding, or they're planning to have their children and they're applying for their leave now. The next highest category you can see there is for a person's own serious health condition. And then we did have 3 claims for organ or bone marrow donation and 1 claim for family violence, but they're definitely in that other category that is smaller. Then I'll go to the next slide and show you what the metrics look like right now. You can see that we have 7 approvals to date. Those approvals are for claims where we've had enough documentation for a decision to be made. We did have a few people that came with everything that they needed in advance, and we were able to move on those quickly. And then there were others, the vast majority, where most of the information has been provided, or some of it, but we're still waiting to get other documentation. We have received about 1,300, almost 1,400 calls, and most of those, as you can see, have been answered within 30 seconds. We have more than half of our claims volume this month, at least in this last week, coming to us through our online portal, and then the remainder are coming through the phone. So these statistics might change a bit starting next month when benefits will actually be paid. We may see a significant uptick in the claims that come in by phone because people will realize, wait a minute, I have a qualifying condition and would prefer to just speak to someone. So they will essentially be making those calls, and we expect to see the volume come in. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can see everybody. If there's any questions about what I've shared, I'm happy to pull the slides back up again for reference.
Andrea, this is Isha. It's great information that you're sharing. Do we have a sense on sentiment and feedback thus far, whether if it's through phone calls or online claim submissions? Are we collecting feedback?
We are. It's pretty anecdotal. So we've had a few people who called and said, I'm not interested in submitting my claim in either of the 2 methods that you prefer as an organization. I want to mail it, I want to email it. So we're working on a form so that they can have one that's more comprehensive. We really were trying to drive people online and by phone because, first of all, online really allows you to have the greatest degree of transparency. The online system is designed for you to have a dashboard that tells you what the status of your claim is. So you can tell it'll tell you what documents you're missing. It'll explain where they are in the decision process. So it's an easier process to follow. And you can do the same thing telephonically. It's not as facile with the other methods, but we do know that there are different levels of comfort with technology that might be generational or not, so, personally, like my sister-in-law is 40 and she still has a flip phone, so it all depends on how you feel. I can't get her let go of that thing. So it all depends on where you are, right, in your level of comfort. But right now we find that I can just tell you anecdotally, I've not received any direct complaints about the service that's been provided or the quality of service that people have been receiving. And we've been monitoring social media. We haven't seen anything. So where we are right now is that people are getting their claims filed. They're getting the information that they need. They're being supported. And that's what we expected to have happen.
That's great. And one more question. How has site performance been since people have been banging on it a little bit?
Oh, actually, it's been great. So it's one of the many, many things that keep me up at night. But Lori, you want to speak a little bit to the testing we did about site performance beforehand?
We did quite a bit of testing beforehand. We can have over 25,000 people on the site at the same time and not have any impact. And that's as far as we thought we needed to go with the testing. So we're in good shape and we haven't seen any blips yet.
Sounds good.
One other benefit I would just mention of using the online approach to applications is that if through the process of creating a username and password, essentially a digital identity with PFML, this authority is using the same technology backend that we're rolling out across the state for all the other access to state services. And so with an individual's consent, it will create the framework through which we can then share with them information about other services that could be available to them by other state agencies, and also save them the trouble of having to remember a bunch of usernames and passwords at other sites around the state, kind of giving them a unified entry point into state services. So, this team has been supportive of adopting that approach, which will pay benefits to our constituents in other ways as well. I would just add my comment, which is, that 95% answer rate within 30 seconds. I know we were all kind of nervously awaiting to see, the crush of initial applicants. We'd heard stories about other states, really getting hammered in those early days. And I just wanted to compliment the staff here and our partners at AFLAC. You don't get that kind of response time by accident. It happens through a lot of advanced preparation and very thoughtful work to be ready. And so hats off to the team for making sure that it was a very positive phone experience for everyone, even in those early days.
Thank you. We appreciate that. I don't know if anybody else from our team wants to add anything. No?
I will, Andrea. I'll just add that
sure.
A couple of Facebook comments or social media comments that came in at the very beginning, actually on the day that we opened, were very complimentary to the phone service that they received. I think 2 individuals wrote in and said that it was a quick process. The customer service was wonderful, very helpful. So there is, for the folks that have taken the time to reach out, it's been very, very positive.
I think the last thing I'll add is that if a person has called and for some reason they've abandoned the call, the service agents are calling the people back to find out, were they just tired of holding on for 20 seconds rather than 30 seconds? Did something happen? Or had they changed their mind about filing a claim? So, and I think that's been very helpful and surprising to people. And some of us called and deliberately abandoned the call to see what would happen. And then we got a call back to say, is everything okay? Do you need any help? Which is a great service as well. Okay. So that's what I have to offer right now. It's only been a week, and we'll continue to keep you posted every month.
Yeah, I think just to highlight that the fact that we're a week into claims, but we're still a few weeks out from the start of paying benefits, and there's already almost 2,000 claims in. There's any number of claims that have already been approved. I think is really extraordinary, and I think sets for success. And I really hope that it is the case that all of this tremendous pre-planning, and particularly this great sort of early rollout, that smooths the path into January 1st. Particularly since if I read the press reports correctly, it sounded like there were close to 500 claims the first day.
Yes,
so
that's correct.
The folks who are truly on the ball and ready to file early, my hope is we've accounted for many of them in the system, and therefore will not that will smooth the path with less sort of pent up demand into January. But I think it sounds like things are off to a really excellent start.
I think that's right. And we took this advice particularly from Washington State that said, if you can open your claims process before payments are actually due, that will be an enormous benefit to you. And so we really pushed AFLAC. I'll never forget the looks on their faces when they said, all right, so it's just with the contract signed, so it's December. We're going to go with December. And and you could tell, it's like, what is she smoking? But we're going to get this done. We're going to get it done. And they did. They did. They hired all the staff. Everyone's been trained, and they did get it done. And like Jessica said, we've gotten some really great feedback on the experience that people are having. And for every call that they answer, they become better at it. They understand and can anticipate the questions that people will be asking. They get more familiar with the systems that they need to access to verify wages. And this is just the kind of thing that just gets better with experience. And so we're really pleased. Both Kathy and I sat in on a lot of the trainings that were being offered to the staff, because we just wanted to get a sense of the tone of the training and the content, which we had already reviewed and approved, and to just see the level of detail that they provided for the trainings. As an example, the benefit calculation, the at minimum wage one is pretty simple. The above minimum wage are people that have multiple jobs. That can be much more complex, but they literally had a slide for virtually every kind of calculation that you could imagine, thanks to Matt Balowski, who created the spreadsheet that had at least 45 different scenarios that we use as a basis for training. And they were walked through with it. They had the calculators out. They would say, okay, this person calls, they have They have 5 jobs. How are you going to calculate what they're owed? So they have really detailed training, and we've sat in it unannounced. We just sort of have the link and we show up. And I think that that's worked well. So the level of preparation I think we've engaged in shows. So we're really pleased with what we're seeing right now. So we want to really thank our partners at AFLAC because they've done an outstanding job.
Comments or questions? Great. Well, listen, I think, on behalf of the whole board, I'm sure all the rest of the public listening as well. I mean, just again, hats off to the team here and our partners at AFLAC. Usually a week into the launch of a brand new service, you're fighting fires, you're dealing with crashes, bugs, whatever. That's the norm. So the fact that if there have been any of those things, they've obviously been minor and you've been solving them as you go. But, overall, obviously, tremendously successful launch at this point. So again, congratulations to the team. Okay, with that, we will move to agenda item number 6, our committee reports, and we'll start with policy and personnel. Daryl?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So our committee met last week. We wanted to recognize the amazing path and strategic planning by the authority to accomplish the go live of December 1 for the insurance. So again, it was a great recognition for them. As we went through our meeting, we talked about and made comments about the consolidated policy document. We approved them with the recommended changes. And again, there was no comments with our employee handbook. And that's my report.
Thanks, Daryl. Any questions for Daryl? Wonderful, thank you. We'll move next to Outreach and Engagement Committee. Molly?
Yeah, so the committee did meet to talk about all of the great work that's been happening, and I believe Jessica has a more detailed update.
Thank you, Molly. I will share my screen and share what I have put together for you. All right, so I'll begin with our updates as we share monthly. So our program metrics as of 12/7, we're up to just over 124,000 registered businesses. Our contributions are at 300,605,000 and change. We have 458 approved private plans, and you can see the breakdown between those that are fully insured and self-insured, and it covers nearly 36,000 employees with those private plans. We currently have 252 open contact us inquiries, and we have closed over 25,000 since September of 2020. And right now we're at 834 tax accountants and TPAs registered, and you can see the breakdown between those two groups. In terms of our portal updates for November, December on the employer registration and contribution side, we continue with production support, working on the development and testing of the TPA amended return process, and an analysis of the payment compliance process. We have a third-party vendor who is working on security vulnerability testing, also working on loading the DOL data into our platform, and adding our updated legislators toolkit to the website. On the benefit and claim side, we have been enhancing the website content for claims, implementation of the claims process, of course, analysis for coordination of benefits with DOL, and continued refinement of the AFLAC claims dashboard. And from there, I will just go into my quick update on outreach and engagement and what we've been working on. So as I always share our website performance metrics, you can see the 3-month trend with September, October, November. In November, I did want to note that the top pages, as we would expect, were shifting towards the employee side. So the employee landing page, followed by prepare to submit a claim and frequently asked questions. I thought it would be interesting to look at the website metrics for the first week of December, just so we see what's happening in conjunction with the launch of our application acceptance. And in that first week, we have already seen 22,000 users to the website with 33,000 sessions. So off to a great start for the month. I also found it interesting to look at where people are coming from and wanted to share that with you. So the majority of our website visitors are coming from organic search. So that is not search that we're paying for. That's not Google AdWords. That is just people, typing into primarily Google, but also Bing, Yahoo, and finding us that way. The second largest source is direct traffic to the website. So people who are just typing ctpaidleave.org into their search bar. And then the third is referral from other sites, which are primarily the state of Connecticut sites, the portal.ct.gov and the login.ct.gov. So I take all of those as a really great sign that our outreach and engagement efforts are working. We are getting into people's minds. They're remembering who we are, at least enough to either search for us or to go directly to our website, which is great. I also wanted to share some of our YouTube insights for November. We had created some tutorial videos, both in English and Spanish, for how to create an account with Connecticut Paid Leave, as we wanted to, as Andrea mentioned, encourage people to use the online system. And we wanted to really be very clear about explaining to them how they create that account with ct.gov. So that was the #1 video in the month of November that was watched, followed by the Employee Guide to Connecticut Paid Leave. And we had over 3,600 views on our YouTube's videos in the month of November. The second video was actually walking through the process of submitting a claim. And so that video was posted right before the end of the month. It was posted on 11/29, and we had almost 1,600 people click through to watch that between that date, that post date, and the 7th. So as you heard Andrea report, AFLAC has seen 65% of the claims coming through the online portal, which they consider to be pretty high utilization. So again, just another indicator that we are getting the word out about the different resources and tutorials we have for people. They're paying attention to them, and it is turning into, the actions that we were hoping they would take. As I mentioned in the updates, of course, we've launched the For Claims page, and I just wanted to highlight some of the new things that are there on the website. So we have ways to submit your claim with the contact information for each different method. We have the step-by-step process for how to submit a claim. And we have some downloadable forms, which includes the employment verification form. Of course, that is provided to the employee when they begin their claim, but we also wanted to have it on the website in the event of an employer wanting to go and take a look at it beforehand. We also have a downloadable checklist of required forms, and we have a interactive quiz so someone can go through and see if they're likely to qualify before they actually go through the claims process. And we still have our qualifying circumstances and benefits estimator that were there previously. Just to give you a quick picture of what this interactive quiz looks like, it's a 6-step process. And so with each question, someone will answer. And if they answer in a way that indicates that they may not be eligible for Connecticut Paid Leave, we will say, based on your answer, you may not be eligible, and we give them a link directly to the frequently asked questions. So this is just another way for people who are, perhaps thinking that they may have a reason for leave, but they're not sure, to really just get a little bit more information before they actually go through the claim process. In terms of our webinar update, we continue to be sort of fast and furious with the webinars. We have hosted 33 of them between 9/16 and 12/8. We have had over 1,000 participants, and the topic that seems to be garnering the highest attendance is the topic implementing Connecticut Paid Leave. We are in the process of planning our Q1 January, February, March seminar series, webinar series, and we will have roughly at least 30 more webinars planned. We've been keeping Andrea very busy with virtual live events with some of our different partners and advocates. So yesterday she participated in a tele town hall with AARP, which was also broadcast on Facebook Live. Today we have her with Quelf for a Facebook Live event called Know Your Rights, Accessing Family and Paid Family and Medical Leave. And then next week she will be doing a Facebook Live event with Representative Farrar on what paid family medical leave means to you. So we are having her out there not only through the radio interviews you've heard of before, but also through virtual events. And lastly, just a couple of images from our press event last week at Claire's Cornucopia in New Haven. If you were not able, I know some of our board members were able to attend. Thank you so much for that. It was really nice to be able to meet some of you in person. I was just blown away by the amount of press coverage we received. Here's a list of the various places that this coverage was picked up. Just wanted to highlight CBS New York picked it up, and then from there, Oakland News Now picked it up. So we are literally coast to coast. Even in California, they're talking about Connecticut paid leave, which is awesome. So thank you to everyone who was involved in that. Senator Krishner, Representative Porter, Josh, everyone who came out. It was truly very, very successful. And we've gotten a lot of follow-up inquiries as well from folks who would like to talk with Andrea and do follow-up pieces. And so with that, I will stop sharing. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about any of that information.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know Isha and Ava were able to attend the press conference last week as well. I thank them for being there. Great update. Lots of great data in there. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, then we'll move to the Finance and Audit Committee. Paul.
Good morning, everybody. The committee met to review the authority's financial reports. So I'm going to turn it over to David to walk the board through those reports. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody. I've been having some internet connectivity issue, but we're not going to let that slow us down. So I'm going to ask Locke to share the documents, which I believe are on the screen. Thank you very much, Locke. Appreciate your help. Okay, so we're going to go over the results for the month of October and also talk a little about November as well. For the month of October, the expenditures for the authority were almost $1.6 million. The significant expenditures for the month were $972,000 for 4 months of post-production support from Slalom. We also had $310,000 of salaries, benefits, and taxes, $120,000 for customer support for our fine partners at United Way, and $109,000 for project costs paid by bonds related to the employee contribution system. Locke, if you could please go to the inception to date slide, please. Inception to date, the authority has spent $18.3 million, $5.2 million of that in the current fiscal year. To date, we've spent almost $8.2 million on the employee contribution system, $1.5 million implementing the claims and benefits system with AFLAC, almost $3.5 million on salaries, benefits, and taxes, little over $1.7 million for our support teams, including United Way, $1.7 million for post-production support, and just under $500,000 in our outreach efforts that Jessica was describing previously. Locke, if you could please move to the bond fund schedule, please. To date, we've spent almost $9.8 million on bonds, $8.2 million for the employee contribution system, $1.5 million for the benefit claim system, and just under $100,000 on chatbot. About $109,000, as I mentioned previously, was spent in the month of October. We have about another $118,000 that will be spent on that either in November or December. We also have earmarked $450,000 for the appeals administration system that the Department of Labor is working on. And actually just recently, we earmarked another $450,000 for them to use if they need it. That's if they don't get their own funding in time. We are working closely with them. And to date, we've only spent about $220,000. But they do let us know when the expenditures are coming. So we're in definite contact with them and making sure we're all on the same page. So the bond funds that are left will be just under $1.9 million that are available to the authority that have been allocated already if we need to use them for future use. Locke, if you could please go to the contribution schedule for the month of October. Let's talk about the money coming in. Month of October was a busy one. Contributions there's a grace period that ends the month after the quarter end. So that was October 31st. We received $93 million in the month of October. For the 3 months ending October, we received $95.6 million. So that gives you an idea that most employers or their third-party administrators pay at the last minute. In fact, the last business day of October, of that amount that we collected, $72.5 million was processed on the last day. So everybody likes to wait till the end. We did get the money coming in. And Locke, let's move to the next slide, please. So through the end of October, we have received $299.3 million. There's currently $287 million available in the fund after paying for the administrative fee to the authority and the monthly repayment of seed funds that the authority has to pay back. Locke, next slide, please. That was October. A preview for November. We have broken the $300 million mark for contributions. So as of December 7th, we have received over $300.5 million. And we believe that we will collect $400 million by the next grace period due date, which would be January 31st, 2022. As far as expenditures in the month of November, we spent about $922,000, and the major categories were what you would expect: over $350,000 for salaries, benefits, and taxes. There was $219,000 spent on the DOL appeal system, paid for by bonds. The contact center was $120,000, another $68,000 for the employee contribution system, and we paid audit fees of $47,000 for the month as the audit was wrapped up. Those were the significant expenses for the month of November. Does anybody have any questions on for the finance team? Okay, thank you for your time. I appreciate it and support.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, David. I just have two comments. One is just when you look at the overall budget, in particular with respect to the costs associated with implementing the benefit administration part of this. I know when we were contemplating as a board using a third-party administrator to support that most substantial aspect of our operations, it was one of significant debate, maybe the most debated one we've had on this board so far. But I think it's worth reflecting now that we've launched on time and with high quality, the fact that in addition, we are well below budget in terms of what had been set aside for that stand-up of those benefit programs. So I think it's a good endorsement of the decision that this board made at that time. Obviously, with a lot of tremendous execution that's happened since then and up until now. But it's great to see that come in so far under budget. So thank you. My second comment is just reflecting on David, the observation that almost everyone is waiting until the very last moment to remit funds, and while acknowledging that the withholdings at the employee level obviously have been happening, much earlier at a point in time. These employers are obviously, enjoying the float associated with the delay between those moments in time. For any one employer, it's probably not a big deal, but at the state of Connecticut level for the authority, those sums could begin to add up to something material, particularly if we end up in a more favorable interest rate environment in the coming years. So maybe it's just something to plant as a thought that maybe the authority wants to consider in the future as we get into more steady state operations next year, is perhaps shortening the allowable time at which employers can remit withholdings to the authority, so that the benefits of the float accrue to the authority and therefore the beneficiaries rather than to the employer.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. It has been a significant debate because that float is not necessarily individual employers, it's third-party administrators that work on behalf of the employer. So we're talking, really large organizations that want their payments aligned with when they're making payments to UI and payroll taxes, and they just kind of do it all at the same time. We've had a really great relationship with the largest trade association for the third-party administrators. We can certainly bring it back to them and continue to have that. You're right about the float. And we certainly have had that discussion with them, and we'll bring it back again.
I think that's part of the profit center of how these third-party payroll services exist, is that they, I had it with my own small business.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. I've been a client of them before, but this is a benefit that didn't exist, a year and a half ago.
Correct.
So, whatever. Anyway, it's worth follow-up, I think, as we get into steady state operations here. So I appreciate it. We could circle back on that next year.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go to agenda item number 7 then, which is our CEO report, and I'll turn it back over to Andrea.
All right. I just have a couple of things that I wanted to mention, actually 3. First of all, I don't know if she's on screen, but I'd like to welcome Jacqueline Cozen to the team. Jacqueline joined us last Friday, and there she is, right? She is our senior advisor and I'm not going to get her title right, but essentially she's responsible.
Government Affairs.
There you go. All right, she's got it. So as she's working on everything related to government affairs, but she has such an extensive background in all types of areas that she's just going to be a tremendous asset to our team. Her most recent role was the executive director of the Connecticut Democratic Party. So we're just really pleased to have her, and she's been with us 4 whole days now, maybe 5. So the work has just begun, but welcome, Jacqueline. The second is that I would really like to thank Daryl and Commissioner Bartolomeo for all of the help and support they've given and the cooperation in getting the DOL appeals process up and going. So that will be live on December 20th. So if someone has a question or they want to appeal a denial of their paid leave benefit, they will be able to do that starting on December 20th. So we're just really pleased that we've been able to make that happen. And then finally, I'd like to talk a bit about small business support. You saw in Jessica's presentation the number of webinars that we've done to try to continue to educate businesses about how paid family medical leave works. So what we're finding is that for those businesses that have had 74 or fewer employees that have not had any exposure to family and medical leave, this is a very, very confusing thing for them to get, and we get that. So we will be doing 2 things. One is we're going to be partnering with the Department of Labor to co-host some of the webinars that we'll be doing in December and January, so that both the questions about how paid leave and family medical leave work can be answered by the subject matter experts. And so we're happy to do that. And the second is that we do have a small business support team. And so that team will now really get engaged. There will be an opportunity for people to go onto our website, and when you choose the Contact Us feature, you may now choose a feature that says small business, and there'll be an opportunity for us to go in and field those questions specific to small businesses and then be in closer contact with them if they need more support. And that's essentially the end of my report, because everybody else on my team has already told you everything that we're doing, so don't need to repeat it.
Any questions, comments? All right, well, welcome, Jackie. Thrilled to have you on the team. We can keep moving. So we'll go to agenda item number 8 then, which is old business. Does anyone have any old business to raise? Hearing none, we'll go to agenda item number 9, any new business? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to agenda item number 10. So in a moment, I am going to ask for a motion to go into executive session, but before I do, just to clarify, the specific reason that I will be asking for this motion is to enable the board to undertake what many board governance people view as the most important responsibility of a board of directors, which is to evaluate the performance of the CEO and reflect upon that individual's compensation. And so that will be the purpose of this executive session. And so pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes 1-200 6A, for the purpose of discussion regarding the performance evaluation of an employee, may I have a motion to go into an executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Carol, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so what's going to happen next for everyone's benefit here is that members of the board have received a link to a Teams meeting and a separate link that we will drop off of this meeting and go join that meeting for the executive session. When that executive session is over, we will come back onto this Zoom meeting to conclude or finish any other business and conclude the normal board meeting. So people are welcome to stay, they're welcome to drop. We will be back here when the executive session is over. And so with that, I would ask that the board members drop off and join the separate Teams link. Thank you.
Carol, do you have the link? Are you all set?
Yep, I'm heading out. Thank you.
All righty, okay. Lock, yes, you can certainly do so. Oh, Erin says no.
We need to
All right.
No problem.
quietly in this meeting. Just a
Yes,
reminder, none of the staff should be going to the executive session meeting.
All right. So we'll step away for just a moment, and I'll be back.
Okay. Um,
Okay, thank you to everyone who stuck around. Sorry we're running a little late now, but we had a great discussion in executive session. I'd like to note that the meeting of the board has now resumed, and I believe we are still recording. So I would like to make a couple comments to summarize publicly the discussion of the board in executive session. As mentioned, we met to discuss the performance of our CEO, Andrea Barton-Reeves. And the unanimous consensus of the board is that she is doing an absolutely exceptional job. I would just note for context that the degree of difficulty of the assignment, which she took on less than 2 years ago, was exceptionally high. So high, in fact, that I believe the other states that have tried to stand up a similar program have all had some sort of delay, budget overrun, had to launch with a curtailed set of services. It's hard, very hard, what has been done here. But she has achieved the mission to this point. She has done it on schedule with tremendous quality, as noted previously, under budget. Board members also wanted to acknowledge the tremendous job she has done building the team, the quality of the talent that she has recruited and attracted to fill out the authority is exceptional. And of course, she's become, just an incredible advocate and spokesperson for this program and why it's so important to families and businesses across the state. So the board really could not be any more pleased and grateful with the job that she has done, and really just offer our absolute highest marks and thanks for her public service and her tremendous leadership leading the board. So thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Of course, we have an amazing team of people. I did not do this by myself, but thank you.
And we knew you'd say that, and of course we all know that, but it does happen with the CEO and starts with the CEO, and so thank you for that. That performance evaluation discussion segued into a discussion around compensation. As members may be aware, our CEO has not received any form of compensation or salary increase since she started with the authority nearly 2 years ago. And we feel that it is appropriate at this time, or we're going to introduce a motion, I should say, reflecting a belief that it is time for an update to her compensation. And so at this time, I would make a motion to approve a 8% increase in salary for our CEO effective January 1st, this coming January 1st, that would be January 1st of 2022. 8% increase would reflect essentially a 4% increase for each of the 2 years that she has been our CEO. We are of the view that she is worth every penny of that and actually far more. However, we also recognize that we are public servants, and the funds that we are spending are administrative funds that we look after with extreme care, and all of us who serve in public life do it as much for the mission and the value as the money. And I know from prior discussions that our CEO feels the same way, but nonetheless, we believe an 8% increase is more than the motion and the discussion, the consensus was around this number. And so with that, I would make a motion to increase compensation by 8% of the CEO effective January 1st, 2022.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you, Andrea, again, and congratulations. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Sorry we ran a little long today, but great discussion, great progress, great updates. Thanks to all. Have a great day.